Hi. Today I'll be making a video about the importance of maintaining an inclusive, genuine democratic system whilst building socialism, and whether we can maintain such a system whilst avoiding falling into revisionism, counter-revolution and a return to capitalism. I feel this is perfectly possible. I was inspired to make this video after researching both the Arab Spring of recent months and the uprisings which took place in Eastern Bloc Soviet satellite states such as Hungary, Czechoslovakia and Poland during the early and middle stages of the Cold War. From my interpretation of history, most uprisings are essentially driven by economic problems. People will put up with a certain amount of shit from their government as long as they're actually living a good life and that government is able to provide it with some form of material wealth, or at least prevent it from organising against it on an ideological perspective. A good example of this is China. The urban proletariat have a reasonable kind of standard of living, whereas the peasant class is extremely impoverished, but they don't have the means to properly organise themselves. And the Chinese state security services are extremely adept at repressing all kinds of, dissent and uprising. This is a similar situation to what's going on in countries, for example, like Egypt, like Libya, like Bahrain, like Syria. All these countries were suffering from, or are suffering from, large youth unemployment and a stumbling economy as a result of living under a capitalist system, but their attempts to protest or to try and change the government from a democratic process were obviously rebuffed from the repressive states, which is causing them to rise up, go on strike, go on mass protests, or in the case of Libya actually attack the government on the basis that they have no other option. What do you expect them to do? This was also true in Hungary in 1956. Basically, after the Second World War, Stalin set about setting up basically, Stalinist Soviet model governments in all of the Eastern Bloc countries under his sphere of influence. In Hungary, the attempts to implement his form of collectivization in a country that was already quite well industrialized were disastrous. They were basically unable to provide the services for their government, and any attempts by the people to try and go on marches, to protest, to speak freely on the radio were repressed. So again, they had no other option but to collaborate with defectors from the army and try and force out the Soviet funded government by force of arms. And I feel this is right. People have a right to rebel against any government that they feel is oppressive. And this is why, when building socialism, we need to maintain a democratic process. If you look at the countries like China, like the Soviet Union, like Yugoslavia, like Vietnam as well, all these countries maintained, and Cuba of course, and maintained a socialist system for so long because partly because they relied on a sense of nationalism. All these countries experienced in an indigenous communist movement which developed and grew and was able to maintain itself for quite a long time based on its association with nationalism. For example, Tito mainly defeated the Nazis on his own, with his own communist partisans, with very little help from the actual Soviet Union in that regard. Soviet Union, of course, had the October Revolution, and until Stalin rose to power, that was a very, almost a model kind of socialist system. They had multi-party democracy, but they often operated in coalition kind of governments. And they also had a form of direct democracy through the Soviets or workers' councils, which until the rise of Stalin were democratic institutions. they were to an extent dominated by the Bolsheviks, but that's what most people had voted for during those elections. So, but I feel that one of the mistakes they made early on was repressing people like the Mensheviks, the left SRs, the anarchists. I feel that all the way through they should have maintained those different political movements in order to build a genuine democratic worker state. I don't feel that any one communist party really has the right to say we genuinely represent the people, we're genuinely fighting for the aims of the workers, because often it's, you know, it's the idea is that the people have the choice to build it themselves. And one thing that, as a communist, I often hear is that, you know, oh, under communism there was no freedom of speech, you should be lucky. You should feel lucky that you live in a country where you're allowed to speak your mind freely. And I do. This is very true. We should all feel lucky that we're able to express our views. And in our attempts to build socialism, we must maintain a will to maintain freedom of speech, freedom of press, and freedom of assembly. We may take exception to, you know, overtly Nazi or overtly racist or fascist movements, but genuinely speaking, we need to let people speak their minds. It's very important that people know that they can print a newspaper, that they can print any kind of letter, they can go on the radio and speak their mind, they can set up a blog, they can make YouTube videos like I am now. It's very important. And in order to kind of maintain a society that's smooth running, whilst we may experience polemics and, you know, debates, that's a good thing. It's a good thing to be able to criticise your government and offer an alternative. Especially in a workers' state which should be dependent on mass consensus in order to form its opinions and its policies. I mean, this is like the Maoist concept of the mass line. The idea of the mass line is that you put yourself amongst the people. You speak to them, you find out what their views are, how they see the world, you know, the kind of problems that they experience in their day-to-day life, and you try and come up with a solution for it, based scientifically. That's why it differs from populism, for example. An idea of populism is what's formed in the far right, for example in the BNP and the EDL in my own country, in Britain. You know, basically there's a temptation to blame just all the immigrants and all the Muslims and all the kind of foreign elements on the problems that they're facing now. And they believe that if they kick all the immigrants out, if they stop all immigration, if they stop the Islamification of Britain, that this might help and solve their problems. Whereas, you know, I feel this is really not true. I don't see what kind of difference it would make. You know, we'd still be forced to work extremely low wage jobs. It would just be more white people doing it. How does that actually solve anything? Not to mention that it's kind of based on a slight irrationality, as there is only about 8% of the people in Britain are actually not white. You know, probably only about 5% of those people are actually Muslims. You know, the whole Islamification of Britain thing is just, I'm going to make another video about this, but I feel it's purely kind of reactionary in nature and to be ignored. But people have the right to say it, and we have the right to criticise them kind of back, and that's what we need to do. A lot of what Chairman Mao said, you know, I'm basically, you know, if you want to hear someone who's a big fan of the way Chairman Mao did things, visit my friend Maoist Rebel News. It's got a lot of information. I'm more interested in his ideas and the way he actually went about things. But one of the things he said is that, you know, the best way to go about things is just to criticise someone and prove them wrong scientifically if you can. But again, you know, it's important that people feel that they have the right to express their, you know, their dissatisfaction with the state of society, and that they're able to, you know, kind of change it to an extent. You know, basically, like I said, you know, you have to avoid populism because it often posits the wrong solutions for genuine problems. For example, you know, like the whole immigrants thing, there is a genuine problem behind it, but the solution they advocate is not the correct one. and they have to be proven wrong through speech. But like I say, that's not what I'm talking about today. So basically, to finish off, send in your suggestions if you can. How can we maintain a genuine workers' state without compromising democracy? How can we maintain democracy without falling into revisionism and capitalism? How can we maintain that workers' parties will represent the working people? So if you've got any ideas about that. I really suck at making videos. I'm gonna get better, I swear.